They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl with soft eyes, carrying wounds that no one saw, and dreams too heavy for her small hands. The heat at the border don't just burn skin. It burns names. It burns voices. It burns the last pieces of hope. Her name was Marielle, but by the time she crossed that final stretch of dirt and barbed wire, she had no name left to give. Only her belly, round with a child who had never asked to be born in such a cruel season. She walked barefoot across the desert, each step a prayer, each breath stolen from the wind. She was 19, but the silence behind her made her feel 50, and the silence ahead made her question if heaven had ever heard her cry. Her feet bled into the sand, but she kept walking, because a coyote don't stop running. Even when the hounds are closing in, no papers, no water, no mercy, just a girl with a crucifix hidden inside her bra, and a baby's heartbeat whispering beneath her ribs. They say she abandoned that baby, but if you had been there, if you had seen her face when she kissed his forehead for the last time, you wouldn't call it abandonment, you'd call it sacrifice. She wrapped him in her only clean shirt, placed him inside a crate near the border patrol post, one she had been watching for days, where agents stopped for lunch and turned their backs to the cameras. She placed a note, written in Spanish, taped to the baby's blanket. Please, take care of him. His name is Emmanuel. God is with you. And then she walked away. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to, because staying would mean he'd never make it, and neither would she. They caught her 20 minutes later. Drones saw her limping across the brush. She didn't run. She just stood still, looking back toward where she left her son, her arms still shaped like they were holding him. They tackled her like she was a threat. Like a 19-year-old with nothing in her pockets but sand and sorrow could ever be dangerous. The headlines called her the Desert Mother, but not with reverence, with disgust, with judgment. A woman with no country, no lawyer, no name, just charges. Illegal immigrant, child endangerment, attempted abandonment. But her soul stayed wrapped in that little blue shirt, where she left her heart behind. If you've ever been called criminal just for trying to live, if you've ever carried someone in silence and had to let them go to save them, stay here with me. This story wasn't born to be beautiful. It was born to be told. The cell was cold, not prison cold, not the kind that steel and cinder block make. This was the kind of cold that comes when a woman is separated from her child, the kind that makes bones rattle inside skin. They gave her a metallic blanket, if you can even call it that. More like the rustling guilt of a country that forgot how to care. Her wrists were red, not from violence, but from the quiet tightness of handcuffs that stayed on too long, like the system didn't want to let go. There was another woman in the cell, older, eyes dry like paper. She said nothing. Sometimes silence is the only language we got left. Marielle sat down in the corner, hugged her knees, and remembered the weight of her baby on her chest. The agents said she'd be processed. That's what they call it, processed. Like fruit at a factory, like pain in a file folder. No lawyer came that night, no translator, just more walls, more paperwork in English, and more eyes that looked through her. She prayed, not loud, not desperate, just steady, like the way you hum an old lullaby when there's no one left to hear it. Señor, protégelo. No dejes que lo rompan como me rompieron a mí. She didn't ask for her freedom, only his. But the system don't deal in mercy. It deals in numbers, and Marielle, she was just another case. The next morning they moved her to court, chain around her ankles, a jumpsuit too big for her bones. She stood before the judge, a white woman in pearls, with lips too thin to understand pain. The judge didn't look at her. She looked at the file and read it like a recipe. Then she said something that burned through the silence. These people always run from their responsibilities. The courtroom went still. Even the translator paused. Marielle didn't understand the words, but she felt the venom in them, like the cold wind from a church that locks its doors to the poor. That moment, that's when something inside her cracked, not loud, not broken, but different, something that had never bent before, bent. And that judge hadn't even started yet, because what she said next, what she ruled, was something no one saw coming. The courtroom didn't breathe. Even the fans on the ceiling stilled, as if heaven itself leaned closer. Marisol's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. She said, "I didn't run. I walked through hell so he could have a future." The translator paused. The clerk dropped her pen. "And the judge?" She smiled. That kind of smile that only power knows. Thin, empty, unbothered. Then she slammed her gavel like it was the voice of God. "This is not a political asylum case. This is abandonment, neglect, endangerment." She didn't look at Marisol, only at the paper, the ink, the lies that passed for law. The prosecutor nodded like a man who'd already had lunch. The public defender barely raised his eyes. 1 year in federal custody, deportation pending, parental rights under review. It wasn't a sentence, it was an erasure. They cuffed Marisol again, hands still aching from childbirth, wounds still raw between her legs, milk leaking through a government-issued jumpsuit. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. In the transport van, there was another woman beside her. Older, black, with eyes that had watched this country break people into pieces. The woman whispered, "Hold on to his name, even if they take everything else." Marisol nodded, because Isaias wasn't just her son. He was the reason she hadn't laid down in that desert. He was the breath inside her lungs, even if she never heard his again. That night, in the detention center, she opened the small Bible they'd let her keep. A page was torn, but the verse was still there. "Though the fig tree does not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord." But how do you rejoice when your body is still bleeding and your child has become a number in a folder? She prayed, like always, but that night it felt like her prayers hit a ceiling made of steel and indifference. Still, she whispered, "Señor, don't let them erase me from his story." And somewhere, far beyond walls and more walls, someone heard her. But it wasn't who she expected, because 2 floors above her, in a locked office, a young assistant pressed play on a recording, and what she heard could burn the whole courtroom down. Her name was Naomi, born in Alabama, moved to Arizona for law school, took the job in immigration court because she believed in due process. But that day, the day she filed Marisol's folder, she felt something off. It wasn't the charges, she'd seen those before. It wasn't even the photo, Marisol holding her newborn with swollen eyes and unwashed hair. It was the voice of the judge, cold, sharp, coated in pearls and privilege. Naomi had been organizing digital case files, standard stuff, until she found a mislabeled file, one audio clip, no name. She hit play, and the courtroom came alive in her ears. The gavel, the rustle of chains, Marisol's quiet defiance. And then, "You people always run from your responsibilities." Naomi froze. That wasn't in the transcript. That wasn't anywhere, because the court reporter had muted that part, erased it, buried it. Naomi knew what it meant. Bias, discrimination, grounds for appeal. She saved the file, labeled it Gideon's Trumpet, a code name after the old Supreme Court case about the right to an attorney. She wasn't a rebel, wasn't a whistleblower, but something inside her cracked. The same way something had cracked inside Marisol, because silence can become complicity. Naomi stayed late that night, wrote an anonymous letter, burned a copy of the audio to a USB drive, and mailed it to an immigrant rights group in El Paso. It wasn't enough, but it was something, and when she looked in the mirror, she finally saw herself again. Meanwhile, Marisol was still behind bars, still waiting, still whispering songs to the child she could no longer touch. But something was shifting. A tremor in the darkness, because the woman in the next bunk, she had a visitor the next morning, and the man who walked in was carrying a letter with Marisol's name on it. He was tall, wore brown shoes dusty from travel, and held an envelope like it was made of glass. No badge, no clipboard, just eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, and still hadn't looked away. He spoke to the officer in low tones, gestured toward Marisol. She was sweeping the hallway with a broom too short for her height. Punishment detail. When they called her name, her real name, she dropped the broom. The man said he wasn't a lawyer. Not exactly. I'm just someone who heard something that wasn't supposed to be heard. He handed her the envelope, said nothing else. Left before the guards could ask too many questions. Marisol waited until lights out to open it. Inside, a printed transcript, lines from her court date. And then, a sentence she never understood in English, now translated, "You people always run from your responsibilities." She read it 3 times, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The shame hit her first, but then came the fury, because now she knew. They had lied, twisted her story into something foul, stamped her motherhood as a crime. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into her Bible, right next to the page about Moses, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't cry that night. She stared at the ceiling and whispered to Isaiah, wherever he was, "Mama's not done yet." But what she didn't know was that Isaiah, he wasn't just surviving. He was watching, learning, and asking questions that made grown women tremble. Because in a quiet foster home in Tucson, someone had shown him a picture, and when they asked if he knew the woman, he touched the photo and said, "She sings to me at night." His hair had grown, curls wild and free like his mother's spirit, eyes wide like a boy who'd seen too much and spoken too little. They called him Isaac, anglicized, simplified, erased, but his name was Isaiah, written in soft ink on the hem of the shirt he'd been wrapped in. The foster mum was kind, soft hands, tired heart. She wasn't cruel, just confused. Didn't understand why the boy flinched at loud voices, why he stared at doors like they might disappear, and most nights he wouldn't sleep unless a certain melody played. No lyrics, just a hum. A tune soft as cotton, fragile as a lullaby wrapped in fear. It was the same tune Marisol had sung alone in that concrete cell, night after night, prayer after prayer, and somehow, through walls, through miles, through courts and cold systems, he remembered it. One night, the foster mother asked, "Where did you hear that song, sweetie?" He touched his chest. "From my mama. She sings it in the dark." The woman's hands shook, because that morning a letter had arrived from a group in El Paso, with a flash drive and a single note. "This recording may belong to the boy's mother." She didn't understand what it meant, but when she played the audio, she heard the court, the voice of the judge, and the sentence that cut through the silence like a blade. She turned to look at Isaiah, and he was covering his ears. That's when she knew. This child had been torn, not rescued, taken, not saved. She made a call, not to the government, not to the adoption agency, but to someone who still believed in justice. And across the state, in a locked room, Marisol sat with trembling hands. As the public defender walked in, eyes wide, voice shaking, and said, "They're reopening your case." They called it a review, but to Marisol, it felt like standing at the edge of another cliff. This time, though, she wasn't barefoot. She was barefoot in spirit, still bleeding from places no one could see. The public defender was new, young, nervous. He didn't carry the weight of her story, only the fear of mishandling it. They found an unauthorized recording, racist language, due process violation. This could change things, but change, it don't come easy for women like Marisol. The first thing they asked for was documentation. She laughed. "You mean proof that I exist?" All she had was memory, and a baby's name scratched into the back of a Bible. No passport, no birth certificate, no hospital record, only scars. She signed affidavits, told her story again, this time in English, through a translator who winced at every word, explained how her son was born under fluorescent lights and fear. But courtrooms don't run on truth, they run on paper, and her story didn't fit the forms. The judge this time was different. Younger, brown-skinned, wearing glasses too big for his nose, but even he couldn't erase the damage already done. The prosecutor didn't back down. She crossed illegally. She left the child unattended. We have to consider the safety of the boy, as if Marisol had ever been the danger, as if the desert hadn't already tried to kill her 10 different ways. They brought in experts, social workers, doctors. Everyone spoke about her, not to her, except for one woman, a former caseworker, middle-aged, tired eyes. She looked at Marisol and said, "I remember you. You begged me not to take him, and I said nothing. I was afraid of losing my job." Silence fell like rain in a room of drought. Then she pulled something from her purse. A letter, crayon written, folded in half. "He asked me to give you this, but I wasn't brave enough, until now." Marisol opened it. Inside, crooked letters read, "Mama, I remember your song. I didn't forget you." Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed still, because a mother learns how to cry without moving. And the courtroom? It didn't clap, didn't cheer, but something had changed. The air felt different. The judge leaned forward and said, "We'll need time, but this letter, this changes everything." And as they led her back to her cell, chains jangling soft as broken lullabies, Marisol whispered, "He didn't forget me." But what she didn't know was that Isaias. He hadn't just remembered her. He had started asking questions the system wasn't ready to answer. They tried to teach him a new name, Isaac. But every time someone said it, he went silent. He was 5 now, small, serious, with eyes too old for his age. The foster mother tried her best. Good food, warm clothes, books with happy endings. But every night he would hum that same song, the melody the court had tried to bury, the melody Marisol sang through the bars. One day he found a picture, one that had been tucked away in the case file, an old one, Marisol holding him, wrapped in that now-lost shirt. He clutched it like a shield and asked, "Why did they take me away from her?" No one answered. They told him, "She couldn't take care of you, as she made mistakes. She broke the law." But the boy, he didn't believe it, because in his dreams, she was always holding him, even when she wasn't allowed to. He started drawing, pictures of a woman behind bars, of a little boy reaching through them, of angels made of barbed wire. The foster mother sent the drawings to the social worker, who sent them to the lawyer, who brought them to court. And one day, in a private hearing, the judge spread them out on the table, each one more painful than the last, until the judge whispered, "Sometimes the child sees clearer than the court." They called Marisol in, not to sentence her, but to ask, "Would you like to speak directly to your son, supervised in Spanish, just for 10 minutes? She froze, not from fear, but because she hadn't heard his voice in over 4 years. They gave her a monitor, a translator, and a countdown clock. The screen flickered, and there he was, hair wild, eyes wide. He looked at her, and didn't say hello, didn't say mama. He just started to hum that same melody, and Marisol, she hummed it back, until they both began to cry. No words, just the sound of 2 souls finding each other again. And the court didn't interrupt, because some prayers are bigger than rules. 10 minutes, that's all they gave her. But 10 minutes with your child. After 4 years of silence, it feels like eternity, and like nothing at all. The screen flickered. The translator stood behind, and the timer on the corner ticked down with no mercy. But Marisol didn't need words. She just looked at him, looked at Isaias, at the way his curls bounced when he leaned forward, at the way his lip trembled like he wasn't sure if she was real. She reached her hand toward the screen, and he mirrored it, palm to palm, glass between them. He said, "I knew you were alive." She almost couldn't speak, almost. But then her voice came like water breaking through rock. "They took you, but they never took me from you. You hear me? I was always with you." He nodded, and then, like a whisper from God himself, he said, "I told them you sing in the dark." I wasn't lying. The translator choked on the words, but kept going. They talked fast, too fast, the kind of fast that only people on borrowed time know. She asked if he was eating, if he was safe, if they treated him kindly. He asked if she still had his little hat, the one she knitted on the road. She didn't, but she lied because sometimes a lie is love wearing shoes. And then the timer blinked red. 1 minute left. She sang, one last time, the same melody he remembered, and for 10 seconds the translator didn't speak, didn't translate, just cried, because no one had prepared for this. Not the lawyers, not the court, not even the system. 10 minutes, 10 fragile, holy minutes. And in those 10 minutes, Marisol became whole again. But the price of that moment, it would come the next morning, when the government made its final decision. They called it a final review. Marisol sat in a cold, grey room. No windows, no sunlight, just 4 chairs, 2 lawyers, and a folder thicker than her story. The judge didn't smile, didn't scold. He just looked tired, said the words slow, measured. Given the court's findings, including the racial bias identified in the previous ruling, pause, and the testimony, both verbal and emotional, from the minor child, pause, we find that the grounds for termination of parental rights are no longer valid. Silence. The words didn't sink in right away, because no one expects justice when they've been fed shame for breakfast every morning. Then the lawyer leaned in and whispered, "They're giving you custody. Conditional. Supervised at first, but real." Marisol didn't cry. Not yet. Her body didn't trust it. Her mind was still waiting for the whip behind the blessing, but when she was led outside, not in chains, not in cuffs, but in clothes she hadn't worn in months, she saw a small figure waiting by a social worker's side, curls wild, eyes wide, Isaias. And this time, she ran. Didn't ask, didn't wait. She ran, with all the strength her bones could borrow, with all the breath her soul had saved. She dropped to her knees, held him so close he vanished into her chest. He smelled like laundry soap and crayons, and answered prayers. And he whispered, "You found me." But she shook her head. "No, mijo, you found me." They stayed like that, until the sun began to set behind the concrete walls, and the world, for one trembling moment, felt right. But justice, it don't always sit still, because someone had seen that embrace, and in a corner of the facility, a white woman in pearls watched it all, and picked up her phone, because the system, it doesn't like to be questioned. She had watched the news in silence. The former judge, the one with the pearl earrings, the one who once said, "These people always run." She watched Marisol's embrace on a grainy video, watched the child cling to his mother like a prayer returned, and something inside her twisted. Not guilt, not regret, rage, because when the system admits it's wrong, it threatens the illusion that it was ever right. She picked up her phone, called a friend at the Attorney General's office, said just enough to sound concerned, not enough to sound bitter. "I just think we should revisit the precedent this could set. If one undocumented mother gets to reverse a child separation, what stops the floodgates?" Her words were poison in perfume, and poison always finds its way to power. That call sparked an investigation, not into the system, into Marisol. They dug deeper, found a cousin who once sold fake IDs, found an old address in El Salvador linked to a gang-affiliated zone. They began to whisper words like security risk, re-evaluation, fraudulent asylum claims, and just like that, the victory began to crumble. The court called for another hearing, emergency. This time, they weren't interested in reunification. They wanted to prove Marisol never deserved it in the first place. She received the notice on a Thursday. Isaias was coloring in the corner, drawing her face again, this time with a golden crown. She folded the paper slowly. Didn't want to show him her hands were shaking. She kissed his forehead. "You keep drawing, mijo. No matter what happens, you keep drawing. Because this world, it tries to erase stories like theirs. But some stories refuse to be forgotten." The courtroom was colder this time, not in temperature, but in spirit. They stripped her of the translator, said she understood enough, made her answer in broken English, so her words stumbled like her feet had once done across the desert. The prosecutor was sharp now, hungry. "Ms. Reyes, were you aware that the neighborhood you came from is under gang surveillance?" She nodded. "Yes, that's why I ran." And your cousin, did he not produce forged documents in 2017? She hesitated. That pause became an opening. We believe this mother has ties to criminal elements. We recommend immediate revocation of her custody. The judge looked tired, older than last time. But the weight of the system sat on his shoulders like bricks wrapped in law books. Then came the final blow. A letter, written by the former judge herself, cold, clinical. The mother in question knowingly endangered her child by abandoning him at the border. Her conduct should not be rewarded with custody. The room fell silent. Marisol didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood. And for the first time, she spoke without translation. I gave birth in chains. I bled on your floors. I prayed for a son you tried to erase. You don't have to believe me, but he does, and his belief is louder than your lies. The courtroom didn't know what to do with that. Even the stenographer paused her typing, and in that pause, another letter was passed forward. This one, from Isaias, drawn in crayon. A picture of him and Marisol holding hands, barbed wire in the background, but wings drawn on their backs. And underneath it, my mama didn't leave me. She found me. The judge looked at the paper, and something in him cracked, but before he could speak, a voice from the back rose up, familiar, worn, the former caseworker. You all want evidence? I have a recording, one where the judge called her people a threat. I kept it quiet once. I won't again. Gasps, papers rustling, lawyers frozen. Marisol closed her eyes, felt Isaias's tiny hand in hers, even from miles away. The tide had shifted, but tides, they always crash before they calm. Because outside the courthouse, two men waited in a black car with a file and an order for immediate detention. The black car waited outside the courthouse, tinted windows, government plates, two men in dark suits holding silence like it was a weapon. Marisol stepped out, thinking the worst was over. She had survived the courtroom, spoken her truth, watched as the judge held her son's drawing like scripture, but the system wasn't finished with her. One of the men stepped forward. Marisol Reyes, we're placing you into ICE custody pending review of your asylum status. No explanation, no warning, just chains again. The public defender shouted. The judge tried to intervene, but ICE doesn't answer to judges, not the kind who cry. They pulled her into the car, hands cuffed in front this time, as if that was mercy. She didn't scream, didn't flinch. She just whispered the song again, soft, steady, so the air wouldn't forget her voice, because that's all she had left, voice. And faith, Isaias didn't know yet. They hadn't told him. He was at the center, coloring, waiting. He asked the social worker, "Is Mama coming back today?" And the woman couldn't answer, because she didn't know. Marisol was driven 5 hours south, placed in a holding cell with flickering lights and concrete walls that smelled like ammonia and defeat. They took her Bible, her papers, even the letter from Isaias. She was a threat again, a case number, a deportation file. But something was different this time. The world was watching, because the audio clip, the one where the judge's voice said, "You people always run," had leaked. News outlets were playing it on repeat. Immigrant rights groups flooded the courthouse. A protest began outside the detention center, signs with words like "Justice for Marisol," "Children belong with their mothers," "Silence is violence." And inside that grey box of a room, Marisol prayed, not for herself, for the judge, the officers, even the woman in pearls, because she knew if she stopped praying for them, she would become like them. But what she didn't know was that Isaias had stopped coloring. He had started writing, and his words, they were headed straight to Washington. It was written in pencil, on lined paper, folded 6 times and sealed with a crayon heart. Isaias dictated every word. The social worker transcribed. He signed it in shaky handwriting. From Isaias, age 6, to the president. The letter traveled fast. A volunteer from the center sent it to a friend. The friend sent it to a reporter, and by Friday night, it was on the evening news. "Dear Mr. President, My name is Isaias. My mom crossed the border to protect me. They said she abandoned me, but she didn't. She sang to me every night even when I couldn't hear her. I remember her song. It's the only thing that helped me sleep. Please let her come home, because she is my home. That letter hit hearts like thunder underwater. Not loud, but it reverberated. Protests grew, petitions surged. Even members of Congress spoke her name on the floor. Marisol Reyes is not a criminal. She is a mother, and this government owes her more than silence. The pressure worked. ICE backed down. The deportation order was paused, and Marisol was released under protection pending full asylum review. The doors opened. Her name was called. She stepped out, same concrete, same sun. But this time, she was not alone. Because across the street, a crowd had gathered, not to shout, to sing. They were humming her melody, dozens of voices, mothers, daughters, fathers, activists, all singing what Isaias had remembered. She broke, not from pain, from the weight of being seen. She walked through the crowd. People parted like water until she reached a small boy, holding a sign with crooked letters. My mama is not illegal. She's just mine. She dropped to her knees, held him, and this time she didn't have to hum alone. They tried to break her, with cells, with silence, with sentences carved by hands that never held a child. They took her name, turned it into a number, took her son, turned him into a file. But there are things this world still can't cage. A mother's voice, a child's memory, a truth too soft for courtrooms but too loud for forgetting. They released her quietly. No press, no apology. Just a document stamped in red. Asylum under review, pending citizenship. She didn't care, because she wasn't walking back into the shadows. She walked with Isaias beside her now, hand in hand, head high. He didn't ask what would happen next. He just asked, "Can you teach me the whole song?" And she did. They moved into a small apartment with a mattress on the floor, a second-hand fan, and a window that let the sun crawl in like a promise. She got work cleaning houses. Every sink she scrubbed, every floor she mopped was a prayer in motion, not for revenge, but for restoration. Isaias started school. He didn't speak much, but when they asked him to draw his family, he drew a woman with a halo made of barbed wire. And under it, one word, Mama. The court case didn't vanish, the scars didn't fade, but dignity began to return, like a bird that left when the storm came, but never forgot how to find its way home. And one morning, Marisol stood outside the immigration office, paperwork in one hand, Isaias in the other. She looked up. The sky was the same as the one she crossed under Barefoot, but now it looked like it belonged to her too. The man at the desk asked her to write her name. She didn't hesitate. Marisol Reyes. No more numbers, no more folders, no more silence. Just a mother, a boy, and a future no one thought they'd be allowed to live. Because the truth, it don't need permission. It just needs to be told. Pastor Elijah was suave, intima, firm. They locked her behind bars, thinking that would silence her voice. But her story found another way to fly. Across deserts, across courtrooms, across every soul that's ever been told they don't belong. It flew on wings made of wounds, on melodies no system could mute, and landed right here, in front of you. If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be whispered until the whole world starts listening. The end.